started. So we have a lot to cover in a relatively short amount of time. So we're going to start diving right in. Keneal has placed in the chat box, she has placed a link for a form that we'd like you to fill out as an interest form. This will help us tailor future opportunities for you. So if you would take a moment to click that link and complete the form, and maybe she can go ahead and put that in there again. There's a QR code if you want to scan that. If that's easier for you, you can take out your phone and complete that interest form for us. We really appreciate it. But the SCEA is really excited to bring this. This is the first in a series of webinars we're going to be doing over this year, and we hope you will join us for future webinars. And if you find value in it, we hope you'll share this with your colleagues as well. So, as I said, I'm Todd Scholl. I work with the NEA and the SCEA as a professional practice and policy teaching fellow. I was in the classroom for over 15 years here in Horry County, taught at the high school level. And then I went to work for about a decade at the Center for Educator Recruitment, Retention, and Advancement. We're also known as CERA. And I'm going to allow Keneal just to jump on and introduce herself.
Hi, y'all. My name is Keneal Cornell. I am the UniServe Director at the SCEA. I just moved here from Ohio, where I was very engaged with our association work there. I was on the board for the Eastern Ohio Education Association. I was a Eastern Ambassador for Ohio's New Educators, and I was also a building representative for 5 years. In my building, I taught 2nd and 3rd grade, so all of the experience that I'll be sharing with you tonight will be elementary experience, and Todd will have of the higher ed experience, so that'll be a nice blend. I'm happy to be here with you today.
Awesome. Thank you, Keneal. So if you would, we have a lot of people. Looks like there's 39 people on this Zoom call, and maybe there's some more will be joining us. But if you would, in the chat, just write the following so we have a record of it: your name, your school, your grade level, your subject area, and just do the best you can with that. And then answer this question. This could be just a quick 1-sentence response. If we had unlimited funding, wouldn't that be nice? What is one thing you would do to improve public education? So take a moment, go into the chat box, introduce yourself, name, school, grade, level, subject area, and then what is one thing you would do to improve public education if funding weren't an issue? So we'll let people do that for a few minutes, and we'll start reading through the responses. And okay, so, and don't forget, if you haven't done that, we'll give you a few minutes to do that form as well, so you can do that during this time as well.
Hi, Ashley. Hi, Peter. Midland's in the house. Whoop, whoop.
Hey, yeah, welcome everybody. Jeannie from Gilbert High School. We've got Marinelle from Cherryville Elementary. Natalia Clark from Bookman Road Elementary School. Aaron Boyd from Dent Middle School. Madison Jones. We got everybody coming in now. Reagan Moore from Indian Land. We're all over the state. This is great. Laura Deese.
Shelby Lethand, special education. Nice. Charles White. Ashley Payne from Pontiac Elementary. Patrice. Rhonda. Cameron. Ebony. Hi, Ebony.
Thank you so much for taking time out of your evening to join us for this. This is going to be an interactive session. And so one of the things that I've always loved to do as an educator in professional learning is not just sit and get, but also to share. And share. We'll give you some opportunities tonight to share with each other. And then we'd love for you not only to just come to the session, but to network with one another. So if you connect with another educator tonight, we encourage you to share your contact information and continue to support each other. Let's see who else. Ebony Williams from Forest Lake and Ashley Fulse. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, from South Florence High School. Natalie Brown and Elizabeth, I don't know how, Venugopal, Beth Venugopal, did I get that right? that plenty?
Yeah, you did a good job. That was great.
All right, cool. Take a stab at it. All right, Rima Desai. How you say that?
Yeah, you said it correctly.
Great. From Irmo, Jennifer Wortham. We don't say your name, I apologize. And Keneal has reposted recently in the chat box that form that we need you to fill out. And I kind of fast forwarded past that, but if you will take a minute, Keneal has posted the Google form that we need you to complete. It's an interest form. It shouldn't take too long. And then if you'll go ahead and post into the chat, that form will help us too. We're going to give everybody a certificate. I will try to get those out to you tomorrow so that you get an hour of renewal credits, and you'll need to talk with your district's specialist in recertification to determine, how they count this hour. And if you don't get that form completed before we start moving on, if you will just make sure you do that before the end of the evening, that would be really helpful. So I'm going to go ahead and move on. I want to thank everybody for sharing in the chat box, but we're going to go ahead in the interest of time and move on. I want to review tonight's norms. Please make sure you keep your microphone muted unless you're speaking. If you don't know the shortcut, you can actually tap your space bar and that will temporarily unmute you. And then when you let it go, it'll mute your mic back. Please complete that interest form that we linked. Make sure you do that before you are done, and that's going to be necessary for you to receive that certificate. Any questions that you have can be placed in the chat. We have Colleen O'Connell joining us, our communications director. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. She'll be monitoring the chat box for us, and I will as well. And then if we can't answer them in real time, we'll follow up with you after the training. We encourage you to do gallery view, which can be found in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. Just click that. It's a view option that will allow you to see many faces on the screen and still see the shared screen. We'll work to facilitate a discussion, and we'll need you to help monitor your airtime so that everyone has a chance to speak. And at the same time, if you're starting to feel bored, distracted, or not participating, just push yourself to take on a more active role. We want to begin tonight by acknowledging that we meet on the traditional land served by, and I'm going to let Keneal introduce where she's coming from, the land she's coming from.
So I am in Columbia, South Carolina, and the traditional lands served here we're from the Salagwedii, which is the Cherokee East Tribe.
And I come to you from Myrtle Beach here in Horry County, where the Waccamaw people lived. And we honor America's first people and all elders past, present, and emerging. We are called on to learn and share what we learn about the tribal history, culture, and contributions that have been suppressed in telling the story of America. Tonight's agenda, we did the introductions. We're gonna talk about getting to know your students, some rules and routines, the first week of school, which I know from a lot of you is past, but as you move forward, just some tips about that. And then transitions, we're gonna go over reinforcers, polishing your techniques, signals and sponges, dealing with difficult behaviors and applying your knowledge through trauma-informed practices. We're going to just start to do a little bit of the trauma-informed part tonight, and then I'm going to do a full session on that later in the year. We'll talk about that in a minute. But we've got a lot to cover in a little amount of time. So passing it over to Keneal.
All right. So as we go through this, we just want to touch on kind of our targets. So essential learnings tonight, it's going to be really surrounding your demeanor. And it's going to influence how the attitudes and the behaviors of your students. So I don't know how many of you are parents, or even if you're a dog mom or dad. I know before I had my daughter, training with my dog, my trainer always said, "You're tense." Your dog can feel that, right? And when you get tense, your child feels that. And it's the same thing in the classroom. So as we're talking about classroom management, it's really important to be in tune with yourself, your body, and what you're projecting out to your students, because it will affect their attitudes in the classroom. And some of the traditional classroom discipline philosophies really might not be the most productive way to encourage a love and learning inside your classroom. So we want to be mindful of that and make sure that everyone feels appreciated and accepted in your environment. Some of the objectives are just to ensure safety for all students and staff and create a positive, safe, and productive learning environment. All right, so we're going to take a quick poll here, and we're just going to run it in the chat. So I put a wonderful photo here of an ideal classroom for some of you. The reality of that might not be your reality, but on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being not at all and 5 being profoundly, how much does classroom setup affect classroom behavior? So go ahead and answer in the chat for us. If you think classroom environment has nothing to do with behavior, put a 1. If you think it's very important, put a 5, and so on.
It looks like we're getting mostly 4s and 5s, Keneal.
Awesome. That makes our next discussion relevant. That's good. And most of you already understand the importance and the value. Nice. Okay, so if you've not done this training yet, we have a training that we do with the SCEA and NEA, and it's called True Colors. And I'm just going to kind of touch on it a little bit, but this is a webinar that we have coming up. If you guys are more interested in learning about personalities of staff members and personalities of students in your classroom, it's very beneficial, completely changed my life, even with my husband. So if you look here on the screen, it has green students are kind of intellectual, competent. We have our orange students who are skillfulness and they enjoy freedom. They like competition and to kind of be silly and outgoing. Our blue card, those are people who enjoy humanity, relationships, authenticity, very in their feelings kind of students or people. And then we have gold personalities, which are very dutiful. They have a high regard to responsibility, time management, and schedules are important. So as we kind of look at some of these, you probably can think of some of those kiddos in your classroom that would really identify with each of these colors and maybe even yourself. And so if you look at the screen, it says age by true color. So children who are from ages 9 to 12, about 31% of them are probably gold. 15% in general might be green, 36% could be orange, and 19% are blue. So those kiddos that start to get in the higher of the elementary school ages and start into junior high, it looks like there's going to be a lot of gold and orange, and those are very conflicting personalities, which means some of your kids are going to need a lot of structure, and then you're going to have some goofballs, right? So we're going to want to keep that in mind when you're setting up your classroom environment, because you're going to want to make sure if you are giving them assigned seating, or if you're putting them somewhere specific in the classroom, that you're keeping those personalities in the forefront of your mind. We have teenagers, 13 to 17, and you can kind of look across there. And then adults, that's interesting to know that 53% of adults are gold. They need structure, they need routine. I don't think that's very surprising to a lot of you. And then we have 13% are gold, 12% are orange, and 23% are blue. And that's good to know for your staff and who you're working with. And we'll go ahead.
Sorry. I was going to say, and we're going to be doing a True Colors training in January. Albert Jones, Cheyenne Payne, and I are going to be doing that in January, and we'll follow up and give you some information on that later on.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So we're going to be looking right here at classroom setup. And with classroom setup, you guys have done this, right? You guys are in school or maybe virtual learning at this point. But it's really important to just think about those different personalities in your room and make sure that you're creating an environment that is supportive to every different personality and different need in your room. And that can be hard because if you saw 53% of adults are gold, which means we really need structure. We need things to be put together and organized. And a lot of our kids need that as well to function, but there's a whole, another world of perspective that needs freedom, that needs choice. And so we need to be mindful of that as well when we set up our room. So give some of those kiddos a space to wander, a space to do some kind of gross motor movement, or somewhere to kind of, some kids need to get away and be independent for a minute. So if you have a table off to the side where when they feel overwhelmed, they can just take a break, walk away, and they're not taking it out on anybody else. Some of you might have a cool down station or a relaxation station where you've trained your students or your kiddos to go ahead and take a break. They can set the timer and then come back when they're ready. When you use things like that, be very careful that you're clear with expectations, you model, because some of those kids will try to manipulate that. So you want to set a timer and make sure you have control of the timer. But it depends on the age group, right? So in the top right corner, we've even got kind of an organizational tool that you can use to give your students, depending on your personality and those in your classroom, the freedom, a visual board where they, if they're here, then they need to leave the room. They can just do that in their own time, right? So I taught second grade, and if my kiddos needed to go to the restroom, then they just move their magnet. If they needed to go to out in like a small group setting or one-on-one for intervention, they move their magnet. That way, if we had a drill or anything, someone called down to the office or they needed to go home, I knew exactly where they were at all times, because I don't know how your day is. I'm sure it was a lot like mine, where kids are just constantly getting pulled for interventions. They might have a speech appointment that they need to make. And so they're in and out of the room a lot. And that helps kind of keep everybody in place and safe, right? So make sure you guys have clear rules or maybe even a contract. So what we did, I know it's harder when you have multiple periods throughout the day, but if you're able to have that calm discussion at the beginning of the year, everybody's on the same page. What we did was we would create an anchor chart, and I would draw a silly picture of me and all my kids at the bottom, like little heads. And when we say, what does a great teacher look like? And the kids would tell me. So that was my expectation. So they expect me to be all these things for them. And then I would say, what does a great classroom look like? And then they would be able to express like, well, we're organized, we're quiet, we listen, we participate, and they know even when they're 7 years old how to act in the classroom. So it's easy to come up with rules. For some of you, your districts might already have like pre-existing things that you need to follow. And if that's the case, it's really easy to take what the students say and slide it into what that expectation is for your district. Some of you guys have the freedom and the autonomy to make your own rules, and that's wonderful. Some of you don't. So go ahead. If you want to, you can go ahead and move on. Yeah. Noise levels. It's good visual for some kiddos. Make sure that you guys have schedules and standards and your outcomes posted for everybody to be on the same page, know what's expected, right? You can go ahead and move forward.
Okay. Sorry, I'd accidentally moved forward earlier.
That's okay.
All right.
All right. So getting to know your students. Just remember that each child is living the only life that he or she has, and the only one that he or she will ever have. So the least that we can do is not diminish it. I think that's a really powerful quote that we got from Bill Page. Sometimes we get frustrated or we get overwhelmed, or in our mind, we're trying to get to the content and get through what we need to get through because it was on our plan to do. But that's might not be what our kiddos need in that moment, right? So just make sure we're respectful to them at all times, regardless of how we're feeling. When we're getting to know our kids, these are just some ideas that I've thrown out here. Things that I've done in the past, some things that you might do. We'll talk about this in some of our small groups too. But we have, I always mailed a personal letter, like a welcome letter before my kids ever came. I got their address, put a picture of myself, let them know my favorite candy bar, my favorite restaurant, my favorite color, animal, fun things about me. We did a get to know me survey that their families did, which was really important to see how their families perceived them, right? Like their family thought they needed these things or really struggled in these areas. And it also had an area where they could talk about medical concerns, things that might be in the office folder, but sometimes parents want to have that opportunity to tell you one-on-one, and it helps open up positive communication. And then when you check back with families, you can say, oh, I saw that you mentioned this, and it helps build that rapport before anything bad might come up. We always did a pizza glyph, and I made it from scratch. It was fun. We would say, if you like to read, draw a box around your pizza crust. If you like math, color it your sauce in red. If you like reading, color it in tan. If you have add pepperonis for your age. And then they had to do a writing prompt that went along with that. And we got to post them. It became like a show and tell opportunity, presentation. It was kind of fun for the beginning of the year. So anything like that that you can do at the beginning that gets to know each other, they can make connections with their peers, they can get comfortable standing up in front of everybody and talking. Those things are all really helpful at the beginning of the year, getting to know each other. Think, pair, share. Just make sure kids find things in common with someone else. So like I would draw 2 sticks and say, everybody had a number in my room, and I'd say 4 and 8. Go find 3 things you have in common, and then make up a secret handshake and come back and show me. And so it gave them opportunity to meet new people that they wouldn't necessarily speak to if they were to get to choose their own friends. And then sometimes I'd say, come up with one plan to do at recess, like just one thing. And so that really helped them to step outside of their box and their comfort zone and develop new friendships. And that helped with our community in the classroom and ultimately behavior. Responsive classroom. If you guys have ever done that before, if you're already doing it, awesome, you know all about it. If not, one of the big pieces of responsive classroom is a morning meeting where you do a greeting with each other. You share something. There's a fun activity and message. If you go to Teachers Pay Teachers, there are thousands of awesome resources people have created for that. And taking time to do a morning meeting or just a meeting, like a social time, that is really, really valuable for your classroom management. I know I taught 6 years, and 5 years I was really, really, really into the meat at the beginning of my year and building our community and making sure that everybody felt valued. And that last year around COVID time, I felt pressure to get everything onto Google Classroom, right? And learning the new platforms and feeling that anxiety. And I rushed into the content, and I was like, oh, what has happened to my room? So that's that. Go ahead, Todd.
No, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. There was a quick question.
Yeah.
Anne Marie was asking, Anne Marie, do you mind unmuting yourself? Because you asked about a particular idea that Keneal mentioned, but asked how it could be implemented in a COVID environment. So could you ask her specifically about the particular idea you were thinking of?
Yes, with the classroom setup, and having a separate space off for a student, that might need a cool down area, with us having to do 3 to 6 feet apart, I find that kind of hard to implement right now because we need every bit of space to keep them just distance.
Right. Yeah. So I'm just brainstorming right now. But what if they just had a safe space under their desk instead of making it a whole new place? Maybe it's like a getaway and they could put a picture underneath their desk or something. Like every student could maybe create something that's calming for them. And then you could tape it underneath their desk. I don't know. Do you have multiple periods in a day, or are you in same kids all day?
I teach high school, so I don't see them crawling underneath their desk.
Yeah. Well, it's hard for space in COVID times. I know if you're comfortable, some people like to have a desk outside of their door. Go ahead, Todd.
I'm good.
Oh, okay. I thought you had your hand raised.
No.
Yeah. So if space is the issue, my mindset says put a extra desk outside your room, and if they need to take a break and you trust them to do that, then you can do that. But you'd have to know your students, right? You'd have to know what your building allows, what resources you have available if you have those resources, like extra desks and things. Thank you. All right. Okay, so one thing that I did for my students to make sure they felt valued in the room was I always took notes. Or sometimes if I didn't have something, I'd say, oh, I need to go make a note of that. And so it really, maybe it wasn't that big of a deal to know, but if I acted like I was taking a note, or if I did take notes, then they felt like, oh, they really valued that. And it really seemed to, in my elementary room, I don't know about your big kids, but really seemed to just create that like, oh, she appreciates what I said. She respected what I said. She wrote it down. She took note of it. What I say is important. And that they might not have that anywhere else. And so for me to value, like, your favorite color is blue, I have to write that down. I think so-and-so also really liked blue. Hey, Claire, did you like blue too? Oh, I thought so. And then you're building that community. Something, just a small little tip or trick. All right, I think we're gonna go into breakout session. I'm so excited about this. You ready, Todd?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead. All right, so in our breakout room, Todd's gonna get it set up right now. And you guys are gonna share what activities you enjoy using to get to know your students. So I shared a handful of things that I've done to get to know my kiddos, but I know that you guys are already amazing educators and you guys already have lots of great ideas and things that you've done that worked for you. And so when I've done this in the past, I actually worked with a high school teacher and she was like, oh, I never thought of that, and vice versa. I got a lot of great information from her. So even if you're not the same grade band, I think this is still valuable. We're going to give you guys about 7 minutes to chat in your breakout rooms.
All right, I think we're ready to go. And Keneal will be in one breakout room and I'll be in the other. But we want to make sure you guys have the opportunity to share. So here we go.
And Todd, I think as the host, you have to pick your breakout room. It wouldn't let me pull you into one.
Okay.
Yeah. So, yeah.
All right. I'm going into which room do you want me to go into, 1 or 2?
Keneal is in number, she's
Nope.
supposed to go to 2.
Okay. So
Figure it out. We did a figure me out, but we did a math way. So
Hello, hello.
all right, I think we're back.
All right, so a couple things in my group that I was in, I just wanted to point out. A lot of people had mentioned that they do a share time or they do like a student of the day or a student of the week, just so that all those kiddos are recognized, they have the opportunity to speak and share. And I thought that was really wonderful. And Laura in our group talked about how she's in a special needs unit that specifically, I think she said deaf and blind. You can correct me if I'm wrong, Laura. But one of the things that they did was they would have their students draw. And so since some of them couldn't hear, then it was an opportunity for them, deaf and hard of hearing. Yes, there you go. Thank you, Laura. Then they would draw what they wanted to share, and then they would reflect and they would keep that. And I thought that was really, really awesome. So thank you guys so much for sharing. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and look at our rules. We kind of talked about this earlier. I'm going to go fast through this part. Involve the class in making your rules. We mentioned that earlier. Even if you already have like predetermined rules you have to use because of a program that your district adopted, have them create it anyway, and then just kind of fit what they've said into what you need to use. That way they've had some type of buy-in, you've had conversation around it. I always like made it the anchor chart, and then I would have the kids sign off on it, but I only had one group of students. So if you had multiple periods throughout the day, that might be kind of hard to do. But I would always refer them to, oh, I think we talked about that earlier, right? Is your name on the chart and I would point and they're like, oh yeah, I got it. Get it back together, try again. It was something that we could make reference to. Keep the rules short, easy to understand. I don't know if any of you are into whole brain learning. I think there's multiple meanings for that, so I'll be careful how I use it. But whole brain teaching with Chris Biffle, there's an amazing curriculum. We're going to talk about that a little bit more later. But their rules are gestures, and they're short, they're quick, to the point. And then after we have that great discussion, they fit in there really nicely. So kind of doing gestures or something silly with your rules to help them remember is fun. Phrases, phrase them in a positive way. So we don't want to say what we don't do. We want to just focus on what we do, right? So remind the class of the rules at times other than when someone has misbehaved. So we want to say like, something in a positive frame, like when students do this, we get this result, right? And we want to frame it in a positive way and really point out those kiddos that are doing great things, like, oh my gosh, Antonio, I love the way that you got to your seat right away. Like that was impressive. And then you'll see like 15 other kids, especially when they're younger. I don't know about your older ones, but those younger ones, they're quick to get in their seat, right? Or wow, so-and-so is really quiet. And the kids get excited and they all want to follow suit. So make different rules for different kinds of activities. So like in whole brain rules, one is stay in your seat. Well, that's not relevant if you're doing group work and you guys need to be up moving around, or if you're doing an activity and you're supposed to be dancing like an animal or something just wonky, right? So you're going to want to make different rules and make sure you have clear expectations for different activities, because if they're not clear and you didn't say them, they do not exist, right? So it's going to get chaotic really fast. Key children in when different rules apply. So we always did, like, this was part of our whole brain, but we would do the class, boom, and then they would all do it and their hands and eyes would be on me. And I'd say, so right now is when we do these rules for this reason. Are we all on the same page? Repeat me, go. And they'd say the rules. And then I'd say, okay, now you're free to go. And they would break out. It was engaging. It was fast paced. It was silly. Everybody knew what to expect. They repeated it and we moved on. Post the rules and review them every so often. Ours were gestures. So the kids led them every day. It was part of our morning meeting. We reviewed them every day. And if a rule isn't working, change it. It's okay for something to not work. I think every year and even week to week, something works for one student, and then all of a sudden it doesn't work anymore. And you've got to flip the script, and that's okay to just accept it and change it.
Keneal, I wanted to just mention that I was at the high school level for the majority of my career. And one of the most powerful shifts I made was moving away from focusing on the maladaptive behaviors and chiding students for that, and focusing on the students who were doing things the right way and complimenting and praising that. And it totally transformed the environment of my classroom. So it works at the high school level, at least it did for me, focusing on telling students, hey, thanks so much for sitting down. Thanks so much for doing the work. I appreciate this, focusing on those positives, because not only does it reinforce that behavior for those students, but like you said, the students who aren't doing what they're supposed to do, they want that praise as well. So that works really, really well at all levels.
Yes, thank you. Awesome. So I'm not going to do much with the first few weeks because you guys are already into it, right? You're in the meat of it. And but what I do want to say is this, and this is really important, and I had to remind myself of this the whole first quarter of every year, especially when you get to the end of the first quarter and you're like, okay, get it together. We've been here how many weeks now? We know what the routine is. We know what the expectations are. Why aren't they doing it? Kind of feeling when you just have a rough day. And remember this, okay? We want to go slow. We want to model. Don't skip out on that time of modeling, going over expectations, going slow in the beginning to go fast later. Sometimes we want to jump into content and then you didn't really clearly model or clarify those expectations enough. And especially for your younger kiddos, but you might have heard some of these. It takes 21 days to break a bad habit. And how many bad habits do our kiddos come to us with, right? Especially if expectations from year to year and teacher to teacher are different, and parent expectations are not the same as teacher expectations. So it's going to take 21 days to break a bad habit. It takes 66 days to make a new habit and 7 days to make a habit. right? So just keep that in mind that really 66 days, like your whole first quarter is going to be building habits. And I know you're like, oh no, if you have the semesters where like you're flipping classes every so often, but those older kids are trained up pretty well. I hope, fingers crossed for you. So just keep that in mind in the back of your mind as you're going through, like, okay, it takes this long to make a habit. It's not a habit yet. It's not a habit yet. Be patient, be understanding, be respectful. Don't blow up on them. Okay. Okay, you can go ahead and go to the next slide, Todd. Oh, this was my favorite. I'm a nerd. Transitions, model and practice, tips and tricks. So when we're talking about classroom transitions, I think I have a link here I can share with you guys, but make sure that when your kids are switching from activity to activity or station to center or moving around the room, even getting in line, that you have clearly modeled and they know what to expect. I always felt like, and I'm sure this isn't just where I was, my downstairs elementary kids, like kindergarten through third grade, they were great in the line. They were great in the hallway. They were so well trained. But then you go upstairs to the older kids who have more freedom and they were so loud and they were wild and it just felt like chaos for our babies. And it was like, oh no, the big kids are bad role models. And so I feel like sometimes we think that just because they're older, they should just like have the freedom to be. And so maybe that's your philosophy. But for me, when I was training my kiddos, it was really hard for me to walk upstairs and just see the chaos in the building because they didn't have these transition management routines down. So tips and tricks, stay consistent, make sure you have clear, simple steps. Maybe do a call and response. So if you've ever done whole brain classroom, and I'll talk about it over and over because that's kind of what I lived by when my classroom management, everything's a callback. So I would say class, and they would repeat yes, and then I would give them an expectation. Then they would repeat it. Some of you guys might do like hocus pocus, everybody focus. You might have different calls and responses just to get their attention. So you're not clapping all the time. That kind of gets monotonous for them. You can make them silly. Let me think here. You guys could have a magic word. So my magic word was super second graders, or it could be something funny or whatever your humor is with your kids and your relationship with them. But that magic word was really important because I would only say it when I was ready for them to go. So I would say, okay, hands and eyes. And they would give me their hands and eyes and they'd stare at me. And I'd say, here's what we're going to do. Here's the expectation. When I say the magic words, you're going to go to your seat, turn and look at a friend, repeat what the expectation is. And they would do it. They would use their hand gestures and repeat what I said. That mirroring neurons, there's mirror neurons inside of our brains. And if you're doing gestures and you're having them repeat and they're moving their hands, and this is something you do regularly, then it's actually going to help engage their mind more and they're going to be more active. They're going to be more alert. And if you can cross the midline, right, in their brain when you're using your gestures, then it helps activate a whole nother area of the brain. So these are all things that I've learned throughout the years. And I blend a lot of what I've learned, and we're going to share resources at the end of this. But whole brain and gestures can be used all the way up through college. It's not just for the babies. So all of the trainings that I did were actually, it was modeled with college students. It's very engaging. There's a scoreboard and you can kind of keep points and it's competitive and it's fun and silly. So you guys can look into it if that interests you, but sorry, I keep kind of plugging it in there because it was my classroom management, a huge piece of it. So use timers. Use music, use instruments if you can. So I would use like a little xylophone, like a little mini bell set. And so when I wanted them to switch, then we practiced this obviously, but I would go ding, 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 ding. And then they would all look up. Instead of me clapping or having to do a call and response, there was just a cue of music or instrument and they would always turn or they knew to switch. Timers are super beneficial. even for toddlers, even for high school students, even for me, if I'm in a meeting and someone says, okay, you have 5 minutes, it helps me focus, right? I think transition, there's so many great videos, and I need to drop my teacher tips and tricks here in the chat. I'm going to drop that right now for you guys. Chat it up. You can go to the next slide, sir.
Okay. I'm going to answer this question. We had a question come in from Hannah. Hannah says, I work with 6th grade and I'm having a hard time with intrinsic motivation. The only thing that motivates them is recess time, not learning. I can say, do this or no recess, but they don't feel motivated because I say do this, or else you won't have valuable life skills. How do you help older kids value education and classroom rules? Hannah, obviously there's nothing you can do that's going to make that happen overnight. For me, the best thing that I could do is developing deep relationships with the students of trust. And you've probably heard this, that they don't care how much you know until you know how much you care. And I tried to live by that aphorism, and it may sound trite, but going to their games, finding out what they're interested in, what kind of music are they listening to, what kind of television programs are they watching, making those deep connections with them, and figuring out what it is that does motivate them, who motivates them, who are their heroes, and trying to connect them to motivational speeches or motivational pieces of reading that they will connect with, because what motivates and inspires us may be different for them. But the number one thing is building those relationships. And you've heard that relationships. That's the first thing. Love first, teach second, and make sure those kids know that. And I'm not saying you don't, Hannah, but the focus on that, continue to redouble your efforts on building those relationships so they see you as a person that they trust. Because as soon as they have that relationship, they trust you and they know that you have their best interests at heart, they're more likely to listen to you when you say that you need them to do something. And really connect. Another thing is connecting relevance. Why do they need to learn this? What is it about this? And what is it about this that they need to have a successful life? And to move forward and make progress, and talk to them about goal setting and what they want out of their lives, and then connect what you're doing to the outcomes that they're looking for. It's hard though, and it takes time and consistency, but I really believe that the deeper and more powerful your connection is with the kids, the more success you're going to have.
All right. So next we've got signals and sponges, and this is going to be super quick. We're running out of time here. So if you have a little bit of gap of time, have something in your back pocket. So always have these little like side things that you can jump to if you need a sponge to fill time, is what that means. So some of you guys might have like sight words ready to practice, or a math game ready to go to, or skip counting by 3s, or some kind of just activity that reinforces what you guys are doing. That way there's not this downtime, right, where they're just getting into trouble and trying to find things to do and people to get riled up. So downtime is a breeding ground for bad behavior. So make sure that you are filling those gaps of time, and you're not like, okay guys, just sit there and wait for the buses to get called, because somebody's going to get in trouble. So make sure you guys plan ahead, have extra stuff planned for when those times come up, because they will. Flexibility is so important. I think that's all for this slide.
All right. Do you want me to skip this next breakout, or do we want to do that?
Man, I really want you to get to your meet, and we've only got 10 minutes, so I think we skip it.
Okay, we're going to skip this breakout real quick. If we have time, we'll come back to it. Peter, do you mind unmuting your mic and reading this slide for me?
Sure. Kids must be regulated before they can learn. Adults must be regulated before they can teach. And adults' anger, frustration, and punishments often stem from the adult becoming dysregulated while reacting to a dysregulated child's behavior. A dysregulated adult trying to control a dysregulated kid often ends poorly. taking the time to get regulated will prevent power struggles and strengthen relationships.
Thank you, Peter. So this is something that's really important. It is so easy, and there's no judgment here. We all get stressed out from time. There's sometimes where you just at a breaking point and you get frustrated. One of the most important things that we can do, though, is try to keep our cool. When a student becomes dysregulated or they become escalated, if we match their energy, it's just not going to end up well. It's going to end poorly for both of us. And so one of the ways we can do that, and we talked about this in a live stream that we did on Tuesday of this week, is some practices that help us stay regulated, whether that's a mindfulness practice, self-care, whether that's yoga for you, exercise, whatever it is that you need to do to help you stay regulated. And those practices need to become a part of your practice, your teaching practice. So that's important. So real quickly, we're going to go in more depth on this in the November session on trauma-informed practices. But I want you to identify, not just for a student, but in yourself, this process where you're calm, somehow you're triggered. Let's say it's a difficult parent or a situation in your classroom, you become agitated, you start accelerating to a peak, and then you de-escalate and you recover. And the point of this model that we're showing is that this getting triggered and getting agitated, it's like it's an emotional wave, right? And when you get triggered and you get agitated and somebody just says, all right, calm down, that doesn't resolve it immediately. It's kind of like a wave that has to come over us. And we have to allow time for that de-escalation process to take place. Your job is to try to focus on universal precautions to avoid triggers, getting to know the triggers of your students and typical triggers of students across the board. And then when they become agitated, focusing on redirecting, re-engaging. When they go into that acceleration phase, we're trying to avoid any kind of conflict. That's where we don't want, in the acceleration phase, we don't want to match that energy with us becoming dysregulated or ourselves becoming escalated. We've got to remain calm. And then if they reach that peak stage, the idea is just, we got to make sure everybody stays safe. And then restoring that sense of calm and feelings of safety. But until that student has had a chance to de-escalate and recover, any attempts at sort of explaining logically what they did wrong and trying to correct the behavior probably are just going to continue to escalate and lengthen that wave time. So this is kind of an important model to keep in mind and to think about when we're angry, the time it takes for us to calm down. So some known trauma triggers are unpredictability, sensory overload. These are just things to think about. The more predictable and more routine you establish in the classroom, you're going to avoid some of those trauma triggers. Sometimes we get really happy with the music and the visuals and stuff. Just let's not overload students. When students feel vulnerable or frustrated, when you notice that a student feels isolated or picked on, those are going to be trauma triggers, and then confrontation. So this does not mean that we don't address the behavior. It just means that we're not getting into that reactive mode and that antagonistic mode that you see sometimes teachers get into.
Oh, can I go really fast on this one?
Yeah, sure.
All right, things to consider when you guys are going through the things that the trauma and all of the wavelength of when someone gets upset, right? You need to consider if they already have an IEP. If there's anything in like a form of a BIP, which is like a behavior intervention plan, 504, a medical plan that might be causing some of these outbursts, make sure you know the plan, because if they don't have one yet, like my second graders, I was typically in a situation where I was helping create the plan with the school psychologist and the special education teacher. And some of you might even have a behavioral specialist in your district. I did not, but some of you are blessed enough to have some. So if difficult behaviors are reoccurring, make sure you're consulting with the school psychologist, the special education professor or teacher. Make sure that you have if you have a behavior specialist, you're consulting with them, and that child may need a functional behavior evaluation to develop a plan. And the school psychologist is who would perform that unless you had a behavior specialist. So make sure you're thinking about, are you as a teacher being consistent, using your classroom management strategies? When I would feel like there was some type of a dysregulation within myself, I would look at my strategies and what I typically do. And if I wasn't using them, that was the result. I felt dysregulated because there kind of commotion that was happening that wasn't supposed to be. So just make sure you're consistent in using whatever you put in place. Have your students internalize those rules and make sure, like, if they haven't, then can you be angry at them for not fully understanding and internalizing them yet? So just don't get angry, really just kind of help coach them through things. And then I'm going to pass it back over to you, Todd.
Okay. Are we doing this one?
Yeah, these are just tracking charts. If you get on Teachers Pay Teachers, or if you get with your behavior specialist or your school psychologist or even your special ed teachers, those professionals may already have something that's beneficial for you to use. I created like a document on Word doc, and some of you guys might use like Class Dojo, Class Tag, things of that nature that track behavior. I turned off all the sound and I did use it, but it wasn't to punish the kids. It was for me to keep track of what was going on. And then I also used the neutral points for medication. So sometimes like kids would get newly medicated, and then your school psychologist or someone might say, hey, can you check on them every 10 minutes in the day? Like, you don't already have enough to do, but it's something that you have to do to keep track of their behavior and if the medication's working. Those tools you already have in place, you can manipulate them to your benefit, where you're just clicking a button off to the side that doesn't have a sound, that isn't deducting or adding points to the kiddo, like a neutral button that helps you give information to the parent or to the doctor or to the special ed teacher or the behavior specialist. But tracking these behaviors is super important to any type of beneficial reporting or plans that need to be developed, or that you need to see through that are already in place. Okay.
All right, we got 1 minute left, I think, and I'm going to try to go through the rest of this really quickly. We are going to do in November a whole session deep dive on trauma-informed practices. But in summary, what trauma-informed means is we're going to stop asking the student what's wrong with you, and we're going to start asking what happened to you. And we can better address student misbehavior if we get out of this mindset that there's bad kids or that there's something fundamentally flawed with them that we need to fix, and understand exactly what were the causes and conditions that led to this maladaptive behavior. When we unravel that and do that, and through a trauma-informed lens, we're going to have much more success in addressing these behaviors. And this requires us to understand what ACEs are, which are adverse childhood experiences, and we're going to dive, like I said, deep into that in November. And so you can see, you can sign up for that free session in November. I'll be leading that on trauma-informed practices. And then we're going to be doing True Colors in January. And we will email you as a follow-up with the links to this information and our website called the SCEA plan, which will provide you more opportunities for professional learning. We want to recommend a few books: The Whole Brain Child by Dan Siegel, The First 6 Weeks of School, Brainstorm by Dan Siegel for if you're teaching older students, Whole Brain Teaching for Challenging Kids by Chris Biffle, and then Fostering Resilient Learners by Kristen Sowers and Pete Hall. Also encourage you to check out the SCEA podcast. Just look up the SCEA movement on your favorite podcast provider. And we would be remiss if we didn't ask you, if you're not currently a member, we would love to have you as part of the movement that we're building to make our schools the schools that our students deserve. So if you go to jointhescea.org, you can check that out, and we'd love for you to join us and be a part of our movement to help us deliver better schools for our kids. And I'm going to, we also calling on state legislators to keep students and educators safe. We'll put the petition in the chat box for you to sign. We'd love for you to sign that to share with them. So please take a moment to sign that if you support that and want to prioritize our students' health and and our teachers and our staff, support staff health as well. So thank you so much for tuning in. Sorry, we've gone a little bit over, but we really appreciate you being here tonight. We hope this is helpful. We have recorded this. We will post this. So for any of your colleagues who might not have been able to attend, we will post this so that they can access it as well. And we would love your feedback. Please don't forget to fill out that interest form that we did in the beginning, and I will work to get you your certificates as soon as possible. All right.